Division and violence keep harming the Central African Republic after disputed elections, while foreign powers such as France maintain their military presence in the former French colony.
C'est un devoir civique. En tant que un citoyen, je suis appelée à voter. Et puis aujourd'hui, c'est ma première fois, donc du coup, je suis heureuse et épanouie en même temps.
Welcome to Africa Today. I'm your host, Mubarak Kenya. In this episode, we'll try to find out details of the underreported conflict in the Central African Republic. We'll ask, what do the people of the Central African Republic want? And give you a little history about the nation suffering under the iron hand of foreign forces. In the second part of the show, we'll look at the harrowing bloodshed in Mozambique and its impact on the daily lives of people. Stay with us.
CAR on Path to Chaos. The political opposition has rejected incumbents' re-election, and 6 powerful armed groups are now united to give Faustin Archange Touadéra a hard time after being declared president for another term. There were also reports of voter intimidation, but the government and some international observers said the election has been held properly.
The members of the Security Council recalled that it will be up to the Constitutional Court of the Central African Republic to proclaim the final results. They called on all political actors to resolve any electoral disputes peacefully and in accordance with the laws and constitution of the Central African Republic. They also called on the government of the Central African Republic and the entire political class to engage in dialogue to promote national stability.
The opposition party called for an annulment of the election, arguing that voting did not take place in many areas. France has meanwhile sent warplanes for various missions. We are joined by Lawrence Freeman to take a closer look at the situation. Mr. Freeman, first of all, what is France up to in the Central African Republic?
The French involvement is very difficult, problematic for the country, because the history of the Central African Republic was that it had to liberate itself from the colonial oppressor France in 1960. And the French did very, very little, nothing, to develop the nation. And when the nation achieved independence, it almost immediately went into a spiral of violence and coups and other policies. And the people of CAR, the Central African Republic, have really never been able to develop their country.
Thanks for that, Mr. Lawrence Freeman, and stay tuned. We have much more in store for you.
Allegations of ballot disappearance and other irregularities elongated announcement of the previous victory gained by Touadéra in 2016 after a turbulent coup. Hundreds of thousands were unable to cast their vote in areas held by the opposition. The opposition forces launch attacks on the capital Bangui and other areas held by the government or foreign forces.
The enemy is composed of rebels from all over the Central African Republic, coming from the borders of Cameroon, Chad, Sudan, the Fulani in the interior of the country, the anti-Balaka and the Gabaya majority military, including gendarmes and police. They are all in this coalition. Their size is about 9,000 men. Their intention is to overthrow the government in place and force the population into submission in 3 days.
Over 100,000 people have been forced out of their homes across the country. And this is the situation the president has to deal with. For now, Mr. Touadéra looks set to be holding on to power, but will the opposition tolerate? Mr. Freeman, how do you see the future of the situation in the Central African Republic?
But we have to start thinking long-term about the future of the country. And the future of the country will not be solved by military. We have to get to the point where the various opposing groups in the country realize that it's in their best interest to work together, to fight to struggle for the development of their nation as one country and one identity. And that's difficult, but it's possible to get people to realize that and drop the military confrontationist tactics and find a way, even if it's uncomfortable, for all the people of CAR to join together for the national development of their nation.
Thanks for that, Mr. Freeman. And as you say, unity is key to the future of the Central African Republic.
The impoverished nation lives in one of the most mineral-rich countries in the world. Central African Republic also remains one of the most underreported regions in the world with little access to unbiased news. The country has a dark history of human rights violation and violence arising from repeated coups and lack of a powerful central government.
UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is today calling for the immediate end to all violence in the Central African Republic. Nearly 60,000 people have been forced to seek refuge in neighboring countries in the past month, a twofold rise in just 1 week. Most refugees have fled across the Ubangi River into the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, where the number of arrivals topped 50,000 after 10,000 Central African refugees arrived in a single day on the 13th of January.
Central African Republic's fragile humanitarian situation is worsening, and more than half of the population are reportedly in vital need of humanitarian assistance. Today, the opposition groups reportedly control 2/3 of the country, areas where most of the diamond and gold mines exist. All the wealth and people are struggling. How could that be explained?
The Central African Republic may be the poorest nation in the world. I'm not sure, I haven't looked at every other nation, but in terms of basic parameters of economic development, it's at the lowest end. And this condition is what is driving all the other processes aside from the actual outside instigators. The people in CAR are not provided with a standard of living necessary to maintain themselves and their family and their children. And under these conditions, the violence is very great.
Some of the refugees escaping the conflict head towards neighboring Cameroon, Chad, and the Republic of Congo. The humanitarian assistance by foreign NGOs and aid agencies did not seem enough. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has called for $151.5 million this year to respond to the Central African Republic situation.
I also heard gunshots and I was scared. I told them to wait for me so I could check things out and link up with them afterwards. So they left without looking back. I still as yet do not know where my family is. How are they going to live? If they have run away, how are they going to live?
Central African Republic authorities, meanwhile, are seeking the lifting of the arms embargo to have an upper hand against opposition forces. The constant skirmishes amount to a marked increase in violence, and fighting goes on with no end in sight. So what is the best route the nation can take in the days ahead?
There is no alternative but to have the centralized government in Bangui. The rest of the country is very poor, and there's no ability to run the nation unless the nation is put on a positive course for economic development for its people. And this will require support from the rest of the world. The country is too weak to carry it out itself. And without this long-term commitment, I'm not sure how quickly or easily we will escape the present horrible, horrible conditions that the citizens of the Central African Republic are suffering from right now.
Thanks for your insight, Mr. Lawrence Freeman.
France officially gave independence to CAR in 1960, but has maintained its presence in the chaos following its formal departure. CAR's significance is reiterated with reports of military presence by other countries such as Russia and Rwanda.
The Secretary General remains very concerned over continued destabilization efforts by armed groups in the Central African Republic and calls on all parties to stop violence and engage in meaningful dialogue. He commends the continued engagement of the UN peacekeepers and their efforts to protect civilians and preserve national stability. The Secretary General reiterates the commitment of the UN working closely with national, regional, and international partners to support the cause of peace in the Central African Republic.
The central government only controls 1/3 of the country, and the rest is under the influence of different armed groups. Basic necessities are becoming scarcer and prices are soaring due to insecurity on the supply routes.
Tensions currently appear to be on the rise in the country, and violence could spiral out of control in the impoverished nation. Mr. Freeman, what do you personally think the rest of the world should do in regard to the situation?
They're very, very poor and very underdeveloped, even though they have natural resources such as water and other capabilities. The government in Bangui, which is really the only modern part of the country, is the capital Bangui, has to be supported. And there has to be policies put in place supported by the rest of the world, especially the leading powers such as China and Russia and the US, have to support policies for massive economic development of the nation.
Thanks for that, Mr. Freeman, and we all look forward to peace in the Central African Republic.
Bloodshed in Mozambique.
Shocking news coming out of Mozambique have horrified many in the region. Takfiri terrorists beheaded more than 50 people in the northern Mozambique, frightening the communities. The militants, who reportedly have ties with the Daesh terrorist group, turned a football pitch into an execution ground in the gas-rich Cabo Delgado province.
We hear they are Al-Shabaab or gangs, but to tell you the truth, it is a sad situation that we don't know who is behind these attacks.
Those actions did not target Christians, they were against citizens. They killed both Christians and Muslims, as well as those who practice traditional religions. We do not have religious problem.
There were separate reports of beheadings in other villages, a signature tactic by Daesh to spread fear. The 50 villagers recently beheaded were among those who tried to escape, but were captured by the militants. The atrocity reportedly continued for some time.
We are now joined by Bayomi Azikiwe, editor at Pan-African Newswire, to discuss more details about the situation. Thanks a lot, Mr. Azikiwe. Now, tell us more about the situation in Mozambique and the Muslim communities there.
Now, the Muslim population in Mozambique is very small, less than 10% of the population, but many of them are concentrated in the Cabo Delgado region in the north. So this is an attempt to draw a wedge between that region of the country with all of its natural resources and potential wealth to divide them from the rest of the country of Mozambique. So yes, it is definitely a threat to the national security of the country. It's also a threat to the overall development objectives of the Southern African Development Community, which Mozambique is a founding member.
Thanks for that, Mr. Abayomi Azikiwe from the Pan-African Newswire, and stay tuned for more.
There are constant reports of beheadings in Cabo Delgado villages. In an attack on a different village in April, 50 people were beheaded or shot dead. Women are also abducted in such raids, marked by gunshots and setting homes ablaze.
Urgent measures are required today to protect civilians in northern Mozambique, where many people are dying and thousands are forced to flee their homes.
The international community to act, and acting is acting now. We should not wait, because we have 424,000 IDPs, internally displaced people. This is the UN side, but from the government side, they are talking about 570,000.
The assailants have violently seized swaths of territory and stepped up their offensive in recent months. Many of the refugees are trapped in conflict areas, and many resort to hiding in the bush for days. So how did the grassroots region come to this?
I don't think it's been successful at all. This is an attempt, what is taking place in Cabo Delgado in the north of Mozambique, to get a foothold or a beachhead, particularly in areas that have strategic natural resources, energy resources, such as Mozambique. And all along the coast of East Africa and Southern Africa, there have been huge findings of natural gas, of oil, and of course, this has created a scramble on the part of international finance capital to dominate this region even further.
Thanks for your insight, Mr. Abayomi Azikiwe.
Since the insurgency began in October 2017, more than 2,000 people have reportedly been killed, more than half of whom are civilians. Thousands of people have been displaced, having to seek refuge in nearby towns and cities. With many districts in the north having been cut off, some areas have been denied any humanitarian aid for over 6 months.
The crisis in Cabo Delgado rapidly escalated in 2020, with attacks and fighting forcing tens of thousands of people from their homes every month. Nearly 530,000 people are now internally displaced in Cabo Delgado, Nampula and Niassa, almost 5 times the number registered some 9 months ago in March. People fleeing violence in Cabo Delgado have been exposed to severe violations and abuses, and we are especially concerned for the plight of children and women.
That has made the protection of civilians inside and outside the conflict-affected areas a grave task. The Mozambique's government has even called for international help to tackle the insurgency. What options does Mozambique have in seeking help from neighbors or other world countries?
Well, the Southern African Development Community, which has 15 member states, has already offered to provide military forces if the government of Mozambique felt it self-threatened or felt it necessary. They're willing to deploy forces to Cabo Delgado in the north of Mozambique. Zimbabwe is also on its own, even though it's also a leading member of SADC, has offered to send troops. Mozambique has had Zimbabwean troops during the 1980s when they were under threat.
Massacre in northern Mozambique has led to international concern about security in the region. Civilians, and especially women and children, are the ones enduring dreadful human rights violations, particularly as COVID-19 rages on in Cabo Delgado province.
The UN High Commissioner has urged all armed actors to take urgent measures to protect civilians, but Mozambique is left on its own to take on the militants. In the meanwhile, the communities will have to deal with killings, maiming, looting, destruction of houses and public and religious facilities, abductions and abuses of girls and women. How How does the nation deal with such atrocities, and what role do foreign powers play?
I don't think it's been successful at all. This is an attempt, what is taking place in Cabo Delgado in the north of Mozambique, to get a foothold or a beachhead, particularly in areas that have strategic natural resources, energy resources, such as Mozambique. And all along the coast of East Africa and Southern Africa, there have been huge findings of natural gas, of oil, and of course, this has created a scramble on the part of international finance capital to dominate this region even further.
The militants are based in the densely forested oil and gas-rich northeast corner of Mozambique. The Daesh supporters use operational techniques similar to those from conflicts in Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Mozambique is an important part of the Daesh project to strengthen the Takfiri's presence in southern Africa.
As fighting in the northern province of Cabo Delgado intensifies, Mozambique's president is asking other leaders in southern Africa for help.
The problem of Mozambique, the problem of Zimbabwe, problem of Zambia, of Namibia, of Botswana, everywhere. And this is why. But the target reachable, we believe that we together are going to work hard to make sure that our region is peaceful.
The expansion of the insurgency, which began along the coastal area of Cabo Delgado, has now reached into the heartland of the Makonde tribe. According to Mozambique's officials, the militants are being equipped and trained by foreign affiliates of the ISIS or Daesh terrorist group. Last year, Daesh formally adopted the Mozambique wing of its Central African province, known as ISCAP. Mr. Azikiwe, how do you evaluate the spread of ISIS Takfiris in the region?
There's an attempt for these groups to get a foothold on the continent. They have not been able to effectively penetrate the Southern Africa region due to a lot of it has to do with the coherency of the political and economic programs in the region. But they are going to continue to try in order to disrupt the developmental process in Southern Africa and Africa as a whole.
Thanks for that insight, Mr. Azikiwe.
International oil firms such as French company Total have so far been unaffected by the conflict, but the expansion of the insurgency has also frightened the West. It is claimed that it is ready to help the government tackle insurgency with cooperation from South Africa and Tanzania.
Many people have been forced to move multiple times, and the situation of those affected by the conflict is worsening rapidly. More than 2,000 people have been killed since the conflict started in 2017. In the violence, houses have been looted and burned, families separated, and health centers and schools seriously damaged. Access to agricultural land has been blocked and other economic activities curtailed. There is a serious indication that this crisis could spread beyond the country's borders if it goes unstopped.
The Mozambican military, which relies on private military contractors from Zimbabwe and South Africa, has reportedly shown a weak performance in its confrontation with the militants or terrorists. The Mozambique insurgency is one of the many others underway in Nigeria, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. The militants are reportedly well organized and have good logistics. Thanks for watching us. I'm Mubarak Kenya. Please share your views with us. Until next time, when we come back for another episode of Africa Today, goodbye and take care.